Hello everybody, it's Jade. This is the penultimate episode of Skimming over Pact. This week we're covering chapters 16.9 through 16.13. Next week I will be covering the epilogue, and I'm opening the floor to any questions that you'd like me to cover for next week. So if you have anything that you'd like me to touch on before I stop covering Pact for good, please let me know. So we start with 16.9, and the group is being overrun by the Pact equivalent of a horde of zombies. All of the creatures that were in Johannes's domain before on their vacation or whatever have now been split into two vestiges that are attacking the party and are really panicking but also driven to fight. The other set of people that's been split in two, obviously, are the vestiges that were already there. You know, the people like the middle schoolers. And if the middle schoolers were giving Rose near anxiety attacks last chapter, then seeing these vestiges split into like slivers of people must have really been driving her nuts. Because the middle school vestiges were originally like an eighth of a person, if that, because all they did was make the original sick weak. And then now they've been split in half to be these basically automatons that just attack, and they can barely deal any damage. It certainly takes the party a lot of effort to get out unscathed, but they largely do. They only have one casualty in this battle, other than getting a little cut up. So at one point Paige starts yelling something, and we don't hear what it is, but it turns out later that it's a warning for an incoming AoE attack. And Rose is the one that actually hears what Paige says and is able to communicate information to Blake that he's able to figure out. Which Blake says that he's glad that he doesn't have to pay attention to Paige because Rose can, but it probably took him more effort to decipher what Rose was trying to tell him than if he had just listened to what Paige was saying in the first place. But that's beside the point. The memory that Rose sends Blake is this memory of him being beat up under a bridge by a bunch of teenagers back when he was homeless. And it made me think of one of the first interactions that Rose and Blake had right at the beginning of the story, where Blake told Rose that he was never going to tell her some aspects of his past, and that she was just going to have to accept that. And it wasn't anything against her, but that he was just a person with baggage. And now she's in the same position that Blake was in a few chapters ago. She has access to the entire Rusty Thorburn compendium. They now know everything that still exists to know about their life beforehand. And that's interesting that Rose can take this knowledge of their backstory into the future. But second of all, at the beginning of the story, Rose would tell Blake stuff, and he would not understand, but we, the audience, would understand, and we would be like, Blake, why didn't you get this? And now we've gotten to a point where Rose is communicating stuff with Blake that he understands, and I have no idea what she means, and I'm sure most of the audience didn't get it either. But the point is that they have reached this level of communication that is just astronomically better than what they had at the beginning, and I don't care that I don't understand what they're saying to each other. The fact that they can communicate with each other better than Blake's thoughts are communicating with me is fantastic. So we see some of Paige's abilities here, and they are OP as shit. Like, Paige has been a practitioner for 3 weeks, and she's able to pull off this karmic backlash attack that, yeah, wipes her pretty good, but this is a ridiculous ability. And we find out in a little while that Isidore is dead. And A, that sucks, rip. But B, I want to know so badly what is going to happen to the rest of the Thorburns. I mean, Peter is entrenched in this. I'll talk a little bit more about Peter later, but he seems to be doing really, really well emotionally with this whole magic thing. And he seems to be almost enjoying the fact that he gets to be part of it. And now, Ellie and Roxanne, between the two of them, at least one is going to decide to stick with the magic stuff. And of course, Rose, who has decided to become a scourge. I am crushed that we're probably not going to find out exactly what happens to each of the Thorburns after this. I want to know. So the little goblin with a bra for a hat gets split. So I want to know what happened there. Did each half get one cup, or does like one half still have the bra? So Blake and Rose each lose half of their left hand. So I went back and looked at 9.5 to see if this had any thematic relevance, and I think that it does. So, and I'm referring to the right and left hand tarot readings that the Behaims did. Actually, come to think of it, did Alistair do that? That would be... I'm not sure, because they read Alistair's future with the tarot cards, and then that was what inspired him to take the cards as an implement. Anyway, the point is, I went back and looked at 9.5 to see what their particular readings meant, to see whether them losing half of their left hand was significant. And I think that it is. So Blake's right hand is the Fool card, which means that he can either be the highest or the lowest value. And this is the card that he keeps, or the hand that he keeps. He contributes pretty much the most to the battle overall, but by the end of the fight, he just is a hand, and the only thing he does is trip Miss Lewis in the last couple chapters. So he goes from being the highest to the lowest. And his left hand is the High Priestess card, which is where which refers to reaching out and relying on others, which is something that he did in emergency situations before, but as the book has gone on, he has lost this High Priestess trait. He gave Rose all of his connections, or rather, half of his connections, because he retained Evan and Green Eyes. And he doesn't get this half of his left hand back. So that's interesting. Rose's right hand is the Hanged Man, which stands for patience and planning. This is a trait that she retains. She is, in fact, the person that drafted everybody for this final battle, and her plans are what win them this final battle. And then Rose's left hand is the Chariot, which is winning and overcoming obstacles. So that was what she was doing in the classic left-hand sense for most of the book, until she lapsed with her left hand by abdicating the throne of Jacob's Bell 5 minutes after she took it, because she had been drawing on Blake for her personality and decision-making. But after this, she gets her left hand back, and it is given to her by conquest. Her left hand is white now. And her left hand, being the Chariot, is obviously the hand that references her conquesty abilities and personality. It's ominous, but given the ending, I'm not sure if it's trying to tell us that Rose is going to relapse into being Conquest Jr., because she's already Rose Jr. At this point, we're solidly into getting like 1,000,000 points per chapter about how weak Rose's body is. She's got trees coming out of her, she's bleeding. Mags asks Blake at one point whether he thinks that she's going to want the body back, and she seems to be a little bit sarcastic here, but it implies to us that Mags thinks that Rose's body looks torn up, right? And also, I feel the need to mention this because this isn't mentioned in these chapters, but it was established in 16.8. Rose is naked during this whole fight. You know, that's why the goblin had her bra. This is never mentioned. She's just fighting without any clothes on the whole time. Maybe after this, she'll go get some of her own clothes instead of wearing Rose Sr.'s. So Peter, at this point, starts really leaning into his role as a blackguard. He recognizes when he's supposed to be using sarcasm, and he jumps in. And he seems to be genuinely wanting to contribute to team morale. And it's awesome, right? He has an actual healthy outlet that he can use for his being an asshole. And it's great. And then I do have to say that the fact that Barbahannes has a half of a dragon's head on either side of his shoulders or whatever when they come up here is cool as shit. And I don't really want to give him that, but I have to. It's just that cool. So then we get to 1610, and the barber tries to give the party this breaking speech that on the surface looks like he's trying to convince them all to just give up on the idea of survival and give up on humanity and stuff. But I don't think that's really what he was trying to do. He seems to know these people very well as part of his nature as a demon that changes people or something. I don't know. The point is, he seems to know these people very, very well, and I don't think that he truly believed that he could make them go, you know what? You're right. Humanity does need to end. We're going to help you out, pal. But it does seem like what he's trying to accomplish is wearing them down. For example, he has this dramatic buildup with Paige to the point when he reveals that Isidore is dead. He tries to separate Blake and Rose by causing a rift between them towards the end of this conversation. He's really just trying to distract them and wear them out because he probably knows that he's going to have to fight them, but he wants them to be fighting in a disadvantaged state. So Peter turns out to be one of the best assets that the group has because he can lay down as many insults as he wants and not have to worry about whether he's telling the truth. I do think that if Peter were to take the awakening ritual, he wouldn't have too much trouble not screwing up his words. But the fact that he doesn't have to here is a huge asset because he starts out with calling the big bad evil dude of the whole story a dildo and ends his speech talking about how he thinks he's going to get laid. Peter is a great asset. And the thing is, this final argument that they get into about whether humanity deserves to continue trying to change the world and continue to exist seems kind of inevitable when we think back to chapter 1. From the very first chapter of Pact, it is made very clear to us that our hero is someone who went to hell and back before the story even started, and yet still continues to be a person who believes in humanity. In the first scene of Pact, we find out that Blake ran away from home. He has a horrible family who doesn't give a shit about him and replaced him with another kid, but also that the girls in his family look up to him and rely on him when they're in trouble, and that he's willing to defend his family to Granny Rose as she's dying. Over and over throughout all of Pact, we've seen acts and creatures of incredible evil through Blake's eyes, but he never stops believing that humanity is inherently good. And at this point, the barber tries to instill fear in Blake that the abyss is going to take over everything. And we will get back to this in a minute. So, kind of off topic, but I wanted to bring it up. Something that set off my tinfoil hat is the fact that the barber never invokes Rose's name at all in any of his dialogue. He always says, "the practitioner in whose body you inhabit." And I was convinced this was going somewhere because he names everybody else and he addresses everyone else directly. But he never talks past Blake to Rose, and he never uses Rose's name when talking to Blake. Which brings us to the point where the barber tries to get Rose to stop believing in Blake. He says that he's so stubborn, Blake is, that how could she believe that he would actually give her body back at the end of this? And this actually does make Rose stumble in her possession of him. It causes them to kind of war over the body for a second, not really on purpose, but this grinding of the gears kind of thing. And Blake's response to this is to reassure her that his willingness to give up his life at the end of this is actually a manifestation of his stubbornness. that they were told from the very beginning of this that they were supposed to kill each other. And that by not doing that, he is manifesting that defiance that he has always displayed. So I wanted to bring up this interesting recurring motif that we've had that I'm sure everybody has clocked at some point, but I kind of want to wrap up at the end of the story everything that we've seen so far. And that is that the story seems to be asking, what constitutes the same person? And we get asked this question a bunch of times, right? Is this person still the same if we change all of the things about them? We started this with Mags and Maggie. You know, if Padraic takes Maggie's name, is he her? And for most of us, the answer is obviously no. But then we moved on to Blake. Is Blake still the same person if he's been driven insane, turned into a tree, if he goes around killing people, and if he loses all of his values? Is Johannes still the same person if he's been possessed by the barber, and then the barber, like, screws around with his head to change all of his values and make him act completely differently? Is Rose still Rose if she gains all of Blake's memories and then starts acting like him? Are Blake and Rose the same person if they act the same, but are the opposite gender? Are Blake and Rose the same person if they are the same person but act differently? Are Blake and Rose the same person if they meld back into one body, but then Rose gives half of her psyche back to Conquest? Rose says no, and eventually the spirits believe her, as in, Rose is able to challenge the spirits enough times with the help of everybody else that the barber could possibly be Johannes. And the spirits are eventually like, you know what, you're right, this bitch ain't Johannes. But the book seems to kind of be saying yes. 95% of the story beats we've had between Blake and Rose are reflected in some way down the line. Blake unfairly recruits the Cabal, and then Rose unfairly takes them to Jacob's Bell. Blake keeps secrets and then finds out later that Rose has been keeping the exact same secret, and then they both react in the same way. Blake's first line in the story, her first narrated line, is the same as Rose's last. And it's left ambiguous. Are they the same person or not? 16.11, Green Eyes takes out the dragon, which is just the coolest thing ever. I will never be satisfied with dainty mermaids again. So neat. I feel like this is the final boss that Green Eyes was leading up to, is taking out a dragon. Also, that same dragon is the one that, burned her face off, so. Buttsack returns, whatever the opposite of triumphantly is. We get this line from Blake: face injured, arm injured, and I was largely unhurt. This is hilarious because there's literally no interpretation of this sentence that is true. I was largely unhurt. You can't refer to Blake or Rose because from this point on, they collapse like several times and are just kind of hemorrhaging body parts and traits and energy. So as much as the protagonists of this story clearly believe in optimism and the goodness of humanity and hope and tomorrow and maybe Peter getting laid or whatever, but we get this monologue from the barber closer to the end. It says, "You'll all be snuffed out like a candle flame, absorbed into the what you see above. Time and space and id and ego won't mean anything there. They'll become momentary and endless, existent and abstract. Compared to what we face every day, even on good days, it's the kindest thing to not be." And the thing that sucks is, it seems like the book is saying that what he's saying here is objectively the truth. You either fall through the cracks and become a bogeyman, in which the abyss makes you its plaything. You gain some kind of reputation that turns you into an other based on what people think of you. You might get consumed by a demon or become a puppet in some angel's plays. But because of all the speeches we heard from Peter and Mags and Paige and all them, I still don't believe it. When he was saying this, I was thinking, yeah, but I'm sure they will figure out some way around the afterlife problem or whatever. And that ultimately is, I think, why I liked Pact so much. Because it satiated my bloodlust. You know, I got all the violence and darkness that I could possibly want out of this book. But the characters are still optimists. The characters still believe that good things can happen in the future. And it's a very fine line to walk, especially with how dark Pact got at times. But I don't think I could have finished this book if it was about a cynic. So Rose and Blake have this meeting in their mind to discuss their fate and where they're going from here. And there's still this distance between them. It's a very small distance, but it's in stuff like Rose kind of dodging what she really intends out of this conversation because she's unsure what Blake is going to say and stuff like that. But overall, this is the closest they've ever been in the book, and it's the closest they're going to end up being. It's just a nice, cooperative conversation, and I cried the whole time. But then at the end of this conversation, it just completely broke my heart, obliterated it. Because I thought that I got spoiled on something. I saw the phrasing, the barber cut the connection between Blake and Rose enough times before I got to the end of the book, around the internet or whatever, that I thought that in the final battle, Blake and Rose were going to get cut again. They're sharing a body. They keep thinking about how much of a threat it would be if the barber were to cut them again. And I was 100% certain that I had accidentally been spoiled, that the barber cuts them apart. And that was going to be how the book ended. And obviously that does not happen. But the connection between them is still severed. But it's severed by Rose. She pushes him out. She uses conquest to tear him apart. And it is much more painful than something happening to them. This is a decision that they come to. But it's still bittersweet, right? Because this is what Blake wants. This is what Blake told her from the very beginning. Or from 14:6, I think, was their conversation. That he is willing to give her whatever is necessary to finish this. And for her to have a successful and happy life. And of course, I was really enjoying the fact that Rose was drawing on Blake for power in conversations and in situations instead of conquest. And I was hoping that he would give her enough that she wouldn't need conquest anymore. But it turns out that between the two of them, there's not even enough to make a functioning person without conquest. Which sucks. But after this, Rose comes back out and is in control of the body again, and she is able to practice. She's able to pull out names and draw diagrams and all this stuff that she's been thinking about in the background for the last couple of chapters. And it's a huge payoff because this whole book, Rose has been sitting and planning and thinking. And this is what she was built for, right? The ability to figure out how they should do things. But when we were in her perspective, a few times we saw her zone out in the middle of the fight because she was planning, and Blake had to shake her from the inside and be like, hey, it's time to fight. But here, she is able to actually execute one of her plans, and it works. And you have to wonder whether she's able to execute, or rather, she executes such a big and successful plan here because she has like 85% of Blake floating around in her head now. So 1613, Rose starts by asking the party to buy her time, and everybody's like, what? And it kind of reminds you of arc 15 when Alistair was like, guys, I need 10 minutes in the middle of this library, and everybody goes, dude, you are not getting 10 minutes. Why would you think you could get 10 minutes? But yeah, it's kind of a parallel there. I've had a lot of theories in this video series, most of which did not come true, but the very last one that I expected to come true is that Buttsack would be the hero of this story. 3 cheers for Buttsack. So Rose claims the North End on behalf of the Abyss and invokes the Abyss to start sucking the bad guys down in. And the thing is, at the end of this story, the goodness of Rose is left fairly ambiguous. Really ambiguous. But it's equally, if not less ambiguous, to the ambiguity of the goodness of the Abyss. And I do think there's a parallel there because Rose decided or swore to become a servant of the Abyss in Blake's place. I think that we are supposed to think of the Abyss and Rose together on purpose. But the thing about the Abyss is, it's controlling. If you fall into the Abyss, it's going to give you targeted visions that turn you towards or against your family members or loved ones. It's going to drive you insane and turn you into a tree monster. But it's also the thing that defeats Miss Lewis and Barbara Horum. It's the thing that humanity is supposed to get absorbed by in the future and that our characters are okay with. And some of our nicest characters are agents of the Abyss. Green Eyes, Blake, the Defenestration Man, Rose, and a bunch of other bogeymen that we've seen are generally good characters who all represent the Abyss, even if the mind of the Abyss itself appears to be so evil. I mean, remember Millie Bahame, the one that got hit by a brick? And unfortunately, I don't think I can come down on a side about the Abyss. I feel like there's things that I can say about Rose, particularly when I finish with the epilogue next week, about ultimately whether she was good or not. But I don't think that I can make that same statement about the Abyss, and I don't think I'm supposed to be able to. It just is. So the Defenestration Man throws the barber off the roof, and it's kind of weird, right? You're like, that guy who had like 3 paragraphs of screen time so far? But it makes perfect sense, right? Diabolism, making deals with theoretically bad creatures / being a scourge and making deals with bogeymen saves the day. Making pacts, get it packed, saved the day. This is the end of the book, and the barber was yeeted by a bogeyman that they made a deal with 4 arcs ago. That and something about the theme of the story being that more connections is more better. They made deals with enough people that one of them happened to have the exact ability that would be able to defeat the barber at this time. So yeah, it was good. So Peter is able to break Faisal's binding, who he kind of like does his gatekeeper thing and then does jack shit else and then leaves. And it's interesting because the big, powerful players have done like one thing each, right? That Forgotten God was able to get Blake out of the Abyss. And Faisal was able to, clear up the sky a bit, make it so it's not just a bunch of lesser demons sinking their way into people's eyeballs or whatever. And then he just kind of leaves. But the little dudes, like Peter, who has no abilities, and Mags, who is a goblin queen, are the ones that are actually doing the legwork, that are actually making a difference. So Blake manages to trip Mrs. Lewis, and this also feels kind of strange. Not too strange though, but this is our hero. This is the guy that's been our point of view for the whole story. But for one, I don't think anyone would ever say that Blake hasn't done enough. But for 2, this is the fruit of all of Blake's work coming together. He is the one that recruited Peter and told him about magic, kind of. Mags is his friend more than Rose. Lola was someone who they gained a connection with because of his attack on the Duchamps. Not that I'm taking credit away from Rose, but I'm saying that Blake put everything in motion that allowed this final battle to go well. And yes, the last thing Blake does is trip somebody, but there's no possible way you can spin this that doesn't make Blake one of the most important players in the game. Mags pulls a shotgun on Miss Lewis. I think Mags is my favorite. I have a very strong recency bias as far as like whoever was most recently in the spotlight is my favorite. But overall, I think when I go back and reread this story enough times that it gets all mushed together and I don't really have as much of a linearity, I think Mags will end up being my favorite. I will admit that it has a lot to do with the fact that I like characters who carry guns. Yeah. So 1613. I'm just going to go ahead and start this chapter with, I haven't really been thinking about what's going to happen to Blake because I just had so little clue of what was going to happen to Blake that I just decided to be more concerned with everybody else. Not even decided, like half subconsciously decided that was what I was going to do. You know, is Rose going to live? Is Mags going to be able to see her dads again? I just realized I probably used the word Maggie a bunch of times in the last rant about how much I love her, but I really meant Mags. But in this section, it really hit home that Blake might not make it. Because we start going through this roll call, right, where Rose is checking on everybody, and it's left totally clear that Blake is being left behind and forgotten almost until last. You know, when Mags called everybody's name as ambassador at the council meeting, she saved Rose for last because Rose was the most important, right? When Rose calls everyone's name to make sure that everybody's okay, she saves Blake for last, and it comes across as thinking that he's the least important. She talks down to him a whole bunch. She talks about, yeah, you know, my twin did a bunch of stuff to the insides of me or whatever, and I'm bleeding because of his stupid sticks. It's not that poisonous, but damn near. And it's not even Rose that picks him up. It's Mags. And at this point I started to go, holy shit. Blake might not make it. This hurts. And I really started to panic here. And this whole chapter has such a hollow feeling. You know, in 98% of Blake's narration, it's extremely opinionated, right? He's always talking about what he thinks about what Alistair is wearing and how much he loves Evan and how is he going to get through this next fight and should I kill this person? Not sure. And there's none of that. But even if it's not Blake narrating, it's always somebody else, right? Somebody is the interlude protagonist or whoever. But it's not that way. There's just this devoid lack of opinion and emotion in the narration for this chapter. It's just this cold regurgitation of what's happening, despite the fact that it's the end and we beat the bad guys, right? But it's just hollow. So everybody's favorite thing about the world of Pact is that it rewards the characters for using tropes. And I'm really glad that the trope we pulled out in the last chapter is don't look at explosions. You know, they keep walking and they're not allowed to look at the barber or Miss Lewis as they are sinking down into the abyss. It's great. They had a reason with the barber, but it was also a bit of drama. So then they're able to leave the North End, and the cast up to this point starts peeling off one by one. Lola leaves to go back to her family. Mags leaves, and I was so glad because she said she was going to go check on her dad's. I haven't really been clear on the whole situation with her and her dad, so I really hope that has worked out because that was the one thing that gave me probably the most anxiety in the whole book was Mags losing her ability to go home to her family and stuff. Anyway, we find out that Padraic is going to make it out. Yeah, that sucks. Peter and Ainsley leave together, and Paige comments that there's a 99% chance that they're not going to work out. One reason I'm glad this is the end of the book is that I can believe whatever I want about the ending. We don't actually see that not work out, so I'm believing in that other 1%. But speaking of relationships that we're not sure whether they're going to work out, Ainsley alludes to having picked up on the coldness in Rose towards Alistair. She says that she's surprised that Rose is even thinking of Alistair. And this is the one time we actually get Blake's opinion in the whole end of the book, or in the whole of 1613. He says that he hopes that he has given enough of his compassion to Rose for their marriage to be able to work out. So that's heavy. Rose says that she's going to write a book. And we don't really have a question that she's going to go down the path of, being a bad diabolist or whatever. We know she's going to be a scourge. But it certainly calls back to her walking in Rose Sr.'s footsteps. But it also seeds our thoughts to start hoping that she can break away from the mold of just being Rose Jr., clone of Rose Sr. So Blake, our hero, our protagonist, is barely mentioned this chapter. He's given almost no attention by anyone. Everybody assumes that he's dead. Evan thinks that he's a plank. So in the final scene, Rose collapses. We've gotten, like I said, a million billion beats about how bad she looks. Her hair has turned white. Her skin is pale. People keep commenting on the gashes in her side. She lost a hand and then it turned into flowers. She's pretty sure that she would die if not for the opportunity to consume what's left of Blake. But she doesn't thank him or acknowledge him in any way. She doesn't honor him. She just starts digging into his flesh, whispering, "Damn it, damn it, damn it." And it leads us to the question of, was Rose a bitch and we should hate her? Is this genuinely a good thing for Blake? / is it what he wanted? And this is the final conceit, the final question of the book, so I'm going to give my opinion on it, but I also understand that I think everybody is probably going to get something different out of this scene. Okay, I do think that a lot of people are going to get out of this scene, Rose is an awful bitch. But here's what I thought. This is a gift with no expectation of thanks in return. It's not about Rose. It is about Blake. From Blake's perspective, he gave Rose his life, not because she's an angel or because she needs to lead the Thorburn family or because he was feeling particularly suicidal, but because he wanted to. If this was a story about the asshole Blake and his angelic sister, and he gave his life for her at the end, it would be fairly cut and dry. We'd wonder if Blake maybe wasn't as bad as he seemed because he did something selfless at the end of his life. Instead, the selfless sibling gives everything to the selfish one, and it's a lot harder. Blake is undeniably the kinder and more compassionate twin. Rose thinks a couple of times to herself during her narration that I'm such a bitch, and the audience pretty much agrees. But at the end of the story, Blake, from his perspective, gets to make the world a better place. The only opinionated thought he has in this whole chapter is that he hopes he has given enough to Rose to secure a happy future, or the potential for one. It reminds me of this think piece I once read about supporting homeless people. The piece basically broke down why some homeless people will write things like "God bless America" and "God bless you and your family" on their signs. The reason being, at least partially, because people will give more money or give more often to people whose signs say these things. People want to support the good homeless people, the people who promote their own values, the people they believe are just like them but are just down on their luck, rather than the dirty ones, the ones that cause problems, the ones that hurt property values just by being around. And the think piece asked, is it truly love and acceptance if you only help the people who share your worldview? Is it truly generosity if you won't help the people who aren't like you? Because if you show a person kindness, one day they may have the opportunity to pass that kindness on, regardless of why you decided to support them in particular in the first place. Blake gave Rose his heart, not because he had given her his, but because she doesn't have one. She's a paranoid, controlling, cowardly sociopath. And Blake's decision here is to give her the opportunity to not have to be that person anymore. Because without it, she would have been a lonely husk of a person who pushed everyone who loved her away. She would have been consumed by conquest, and she never would have let go of Jacob's Bell. And Jacob's Bell would have become a cesspool. So there's one final question to find out in the epilogue. Did it work? Did Rose become a better person, or did Blake die for nothing? Anyway, that's the end of The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein. Thanks for reading with me, and I'll see you next week at the epilogue.